Hello everybody, and welcome to our fourth and final webinar for the Social Media for Active Learning MOOC. And I'm very pleased to have with me today, as we do the Privacy and Ethics webinar, our lead TA for the course, Jie Bong. And I'll have Jie introduce herself to you quickly.
Okay, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Jie Bong. I'm a current doctoral student in instructional systems at FSU, and also I'm working as a owner of TA for this MOOC course.
Okay, thank you, Jie. Before we dive into the content, just a quick reminder of the rules of the road for anybody who's new to the webinars. Please feel free to use the chat as we go along. Jie and I will do our best to read what's happening there, although if you've ever done a webinar, it can be hard at times to keep up with the chat and to be able to keep the webinar going. But we have a lot of TAs who are here. You can tell they're TAs because TA is next to their name, and they are here to interact with you in the chat as well. We also have folks who are on Twitter, and if you have questions for us, put a Q in the chat in front of the question. Even if we don't manage to get to it at that moment, one of the TAs will save it, and so we can try to make sure that that comes back up again at the end. And for our webinar today, of course, we have students who are working as instructional designers on this course, and for the Privacy and Ethics module, here you go. We had Julie, Ben, and Chris who were working on this one. The topics that we're covering today, and I really think this is such an important webinar, and a topic, module in general. It's coming last, not because it's least important, but because I felt like we really needed to go through all of that other stuff in order to get to the point where we really are in a position to think about some of these privacy and ethics issues. So today in the webinar, we'll talk first about why you should care about it, get you to think about the levels of privacy that are available with different tools we use. I'm going to share a bit of research, talk about Facebook as a special case. Jay and I are going to share a bit with you about our own journeys with social media privacy and ethics. And finally, we'll talk about developing social media guidelines, which is what you're going to be doing for the module project. I wanted to start out with a bit of a poll, so why don't you let us know how concerned you are at this point in time about privacy and ethics in education when social media are being used. There's a little visual there to help you see if you're new to this. You can just pull down the menu and pick A, B, C, or D. And I'll tell you, Jay, when I first started out as an educator, I didn't think about this stuff all that much.
Really?
Yeah, I tended to just follow what I'd seen done before and whatever rules or policies were laid out for me. And it was really only with time and some of my own experiences that I started to generate my own set of guidelines and see things that I thought maybe weren't being covered elsewhere, but that still concerned me a great deal.
Yes.
And I see we have some folks here who are very concerned or concerned right along with me, and that's good to see. And I don't think that being concerned means that one shouldn't be using social media to support learning. Obviously, we wouldn't be doing this course if we thought that. But there are definite issues. And I'll tell you, every time I go out and talk at a conference and give examples of people using social media, and I'm not talking on the privacy and ethics issues, somebody will raise an example that makes me think, wow, you haven't thought about the privacy and ethics issues. And it's a great time to get into that type of a conversation with them.
Yeah, actually it is a really important topic, and we should learn actually really well. Yeah, and then we can make some kind of guidelines before we deliver the lectures, using social media tools. So yeah, it will be gonna be fun.
And ultimately it affects the success of our lessons. So, what is this whole privacy and ethics thing? Well, I lump them together as a topic to discuss in this course because I think they're very complementary. But essentially, privacy is those decisions that you're making about your identity, with whom you share your personal information. You can't control that so well online, can you?
Yeah, right.
It's surprising what shows up there. Who can search for you and find your information.
Yeah, that is true. Actually, I can control my acting, but I cannot control the others. Some classmates they post something that I mentioned during the class, including my name, I cannot control the others for it, right?
No, you don't have control of what other people say about you. And I'm always fine. So with the name Vanessa Denon, it's really unique. And if you Google me, it's all me. My husband's name is George Williamson. There are a lot of George Williamsons out there, so it's actually quite hard to find him. Yeah, you have to know more information in order to Google him successfully, like where he lives or what he does for a living. Now, but ethics going along with that, that governs our decisions about what tools we're going to use, how we use them, when we use them, how much we use them, because we need to make sure that we're not using them in a way that could cause harm to anybody. And so really what that comes into is we're focused on ensuring that we can give online experiences to our learners that are comfortable and that are safe. And that is really the big thing that I want to stress, because when you feel safe and comfortable as a student, I can tell it from the smile on your face right now. When you feel like you're in that safe zone, you're better able to perform.
Of course, yeah, sure.
and that's what it's all supposed to be about here, enabling the learning to take place. So we do have laws, acts, policies. In higher education, I always find it interesting because we have institutional research boards here in the U.S. There's similar types of entities elsewhere that govern what we do with our research, but people don't turn around and govern what we do with our classes in quite the same way. In K-12 systems, there are often guidelines. Some institutions may have more policies, but I like to stress that you shouldn't count on other people to make your ethical decisions for you. You can use those guidelines, they're a good starting point, but they don't cover everything that can happen. And just because something, think about it in the broader context of life, just because something is legal does not make it the best choice. And so we need to make the best choice. And with regards to technology, social media, you think about how quickly things change. And if we create the policies at one moment, but 6 months later, tools that enable other kinds of interactions may be there.
We should prepare many times whenever something new occurs in this social world.
And so it's always changing, and so if we're in control of making our own decisions, then we're in much better shape here than if we're just following policies, which may well be quite outdated in some cases. And here's what I find happens. This is when I talk to instructors at all levels who are using technology, in particular social media in their classes. Here's what I see. It's exciting, right? So you get this idea and you say, yay, I'm going to try this. And I'm going to have my students using these tools. It's going to be the best way to reach my students. And I love that enthusiasm. That's a great way to start. But I find that kind of enthusiasm sometimes eclipses some of the potential discomfort, some of the potential harm that could happen to students. And I think it's that potential that we need to be aware of. So what I highlight then as the problem that we can run into is stuff like this right here. So you have the student who feels uncomfortable with the assignment. And let me ask you, if you felt, will you tell me honestly?
Sure.
If you were given an assignment by your instructor and you felt uncomfortable with that assignment, would you tell the instructor or would you just do it?
Actually, to be honest, just do it. It is hard to, say strictly to our instructor. Actually it is hard as a learner. We just follow the instructor's guidance, even though we really don't want to do that.
So it's difficult. You often may not even know if your students are uncomfortable with it. I've learned a lot of what I know about student discomfort with this stuff actually by doing research, by surveying students, and the stuff that they tell me, it's really quite informative. And then there are issues like getting a job, and companies are Googling people to find out what they've done. And if you are aware of it as a student and you've been engaging in social media, either for social purposes or for class purposes, you might feel kind of uncomfortable about that. I like to pose it as a series of questions to people. Like, think to yourself about these scenarios. So, if your future employer could hear everything you said in class 3 years ago, when you knew less than you know right now, how comfortable would you be with that? Or if you had an ex who tracks you down because they found out where you would be or what you were doing because of a course assignment, or if a discussion you were having in a class suddenly came out on the public stage and got all of this media attention, or if you're trying to do your work online and suddenly all these people are posting things that make you feel really bad, not people from your class, just people who see it.
Actually, it is really hard for the learners, it's hard to enjoy the whole learning process. You know, making mistakes, it's one of a really important learning process. Yeah, but if they open all my words, then maybe it may be a different story. Yeah, I cannot enjoy everything.
Yeah. Well, you're a learner, and so putting yourself out there, it makes you vulnerable.
Yes, right.
And this last one, I hear this from a lot of people, that they're very concerned that other people are going to cheat. So that if they do the work, is somebody else going to take it and benefit from it? And well, that's an issue. So, all right, GA, I'm going to ask you with the next couple of slides. We're going to go through, what's private, what's not private, and I want to see what GA thinks. And if you guys have some specific thoughts about these scenarios, please type them into the chat for us. So, first space, is it private, and how private is it?
Okay, I can say it's not private. But it's hard to say 100% public. It's like a small group, and I really feel comfortable in that spaces. Yeah,
because it's familiar.
Yeah, familiar, and I can see my friends there. Always I'd be there with same few people, not for everyone. So, yeah, kind of private. What do you think?
I bet you get more comfortable as you interact over the course of a semester with people in that space. So the first day might be more uncomfortable, and then it gets more comfortable as long as you feel good about everybody else who's around.
Yes.
Okay. So in an educational context, then we've got email.
Email.
How do you feel about email?
Email.
I'll tell you, I've been burned a few times by sending emails to people that I felt were kind of not truly private, but between me and them, only to find that they reply and they copy other people on the message. A little uncomfortable.
Yeah, of course. But compared to the previous classroom, actually in a classroom, whenever I talk, it's just instant. But the email, maybe some sort of a recording system, I can say. So I think I should be more careful on an email.
Yeah, well, and I see some folks putting in the chat, not private with sunshine laws. For anybody who's not familiar with that, where we're located in the state of Florida in the U.S., there are laws that make our email as state employees potentially open to anybody, so they're not private. But even so, a lot of folks tend to consider their email to be private, but man, is it easy to hit forward or to print it or to add somebody in on the carbon copy line when you reply. And so it's not quite as private as we think, but usually we get the sense that it's intended between a sender and the recipient.
Yes, between them maybe a little bit more private.
Okay, so let's go on to a course management system like Blackboard. How private is this space to you?
I don't think so.
Not very private?
Yeah, no.
One thing I like about these spaces is that, you do know who's in there with you.
Yes,
it's only people, now not with our course site, that's really an open space, but this one from our university, you know that only people who are registered in your course are going to be in that space.
Yes.
And the instructors.
Yeah. And maybe administrators?
It's possible, like that the tech support people can get in there if there are problems with the site, but folks from outside of that, it's kind of like that face-to-face classroom, and you have a sense of who belongs and who doesn't belong, and you can pull up a listing of everybody who's actually in there and have a good sense of it. Now, you can't stop people from grabbing things out of there, copying and pasting elsewhere, though. Okay, so how about this? Here's a DGO group that I had with a class.
Yes, I think it's a little bit tricky because at the beginning I feel like it's not private, it's public, but sometimes we can make a group within the Digo site. Maybe in that case we can interact only with some people. So,
depends on the setting. Okay, that's good.
Okay.
And absolutely, you can set a private group only to known people in here. You can have a public group. It's really up to you, but you need to be able to manage those settings effectively. And be sure to communicate to everybody what type of environment they're in. Because they may not even realize, if you have a public group that's set up, they may not realize that they're in a public group if you don't tell them. So it's really important to be transparent about those types of things. And here's a blog.
Blog, totally open, so not private.
Yeah, this is a totally open one. You can password protect them, or you can use education-specific tools. This is, and this was a class on Web 2.0, so it's kind of a requirement of the class that you use the tools and you blog. One of the things I tell my students is, I don't care if you sign up for your blog under the name Mickey Mouse. That's absolutely fine. And if you're uncomfortable doing this assignment open on the public stage, then password protect it. That's fine too. But I try to say, rather than waiting to find out if somebody's uncomfortable, I try to be proactive about it and say, there are a lot of options. I have no problem with providing you with other options. Please let me know if you have any discomfort, and then we can figure out how to give you the course experience you need to have with the level of comfort that you need to have. And I found that to be a pretty successful approach. Now, I really like, this is adapted from someone named Elm, and she talks about the levels of privacy so that it's not just this dichotomy of private or public, but this idea that there's also stuff that's semi-private and semi-public. And I think this is a really useful way of thinking about the types of interactions that we can have online. So, if we think of things that are highly private, it's password protected and also restricted to known parties. Semi-private, we're still using the passwords, but we might have more fluid membership of who can move in and out of those spaces. Whereas we get to semi-public, and we're talking about things that you might need to have some sort of an account in order to be able to post, potentially even to read, but anybody is welcome. And public, public is right out there. The whole world can see it. Now, I've tried to overlay that onto some ideas and some tools. So private, we tend to consider our email private. Like, I can't get into your email, and you can't get into my email. Now, there are issues with once you send email to someone else and you're trusting them and how they treat your messages. But for the most part, it's considered private that way. I would say a learning management system is really a closed environment. And remember, I said you don't always know other people can be added into it, but it's still somewhat of a restricted membership, right? So new people could enroll in the class and they get added into the Blackboard, or we could have a visiting scholar who wants to be part of that class and we add them into it. But it's not free for everybody in the world to just go ahead and enroll themselves. Then we move over to semi-public, and that's where we get, well, actually our course site is semi-public, right? Because not everybody in the whole world sees it, but anybody who wants to can sign up for it and go look at our discussion board and be a part of that. And then public stuff, there's not even any intentionality to find this stuff. It's just out there. You type something into Google and bang, you're right there and you're seeing it all. And it's not that you put everything hard and fast into one of these categories. Rather, I liken it to a continuum. But I wanted to share this because I thought it was a really useful way of thinking about what you're asking your learners to do, and also perhaps to discussing it with them about where your activities fall on the continuum, where they're comfortable interacting on the continuum. And I see we have a comment about teaching students to create a responsible digital footprint, and I think that's part of it. Actually, I think that's a real public service that we can do as educators, because I don't think it's fair to assume that just because students use the tools all the time that they know what they're doing in terms of leaving a digital footprint. And actually, you know what? Turns out that's the perfect segue into the research findings that I wanted to get into next.
Great.
Love it when I get those perfect segues. So I'm going to share first some of my own research findings, and later on when I talk about the Facebook case, I'm going to get into some other people's research findings. But this is from a survey that I was doing with Carrie Berner. I'd actually tried to get her to join us today, but she wasn't available. And we were surveying college students, and our focus was really their awareness of social media privacy, specifically in the higher education setting, and some of their preferences with regards to using social media in higher education. And this is part of where, I'd wonder, do they really want to use it in their classes or not? I'd heard so much, like, they'll be motivated. Well, let's see, are they really motivated? I'd actually had a couple of experiences where I thought they may not be so motivated. So I wanted to test this out. So just some highlights from some parts of the survey. This is pretty interesting. So there was a section asking about the relationship between students and professors in social media. And so, they were asked, do you look up information about your professors? Okay, 67% said, oh yeah, I go to the search engines, I look them up. 30% look for their professors on Facebook to see what they're going to put on there. Do you follow your professors? 18% said they'd follow a blog, 16% said they'd follow Twitter. So this is curiosity. They want to know what their teachers are like. Do you want to become a contact with them? 37% said they would on Facebook, 11% said that they would on Twitter. Now, let's get into, so you look up your professors, what is it that you're looking for? Okay, course information, that's a pretty obvious one, I think, 94%. Their academic credentials, 76%, scholarly work, 24%, but hey, 14% are looking for personal information. So 14% of our students, we could say, want to know who we are. Yes. At least 14%. There may be more who don't want to fess up that that's really what they're looking for. Well, when the questions got turned around and asked about, there was a series of questions about what do you think your professors look for you online? And if so, what do you think they would find? And 63% said professors would not look for their students online. And there were some open-ended questions, and one that really summed it all up was the one that said, that's creepy. Really creepy for professors to be looking for their students online. And yet I thought that's kind of naive, isn't it, for them to think that they can engage in that sort of information seeking about others, but others are not going to engage in that information seeking about them. Then we got specifically into your courses. So this is just about students and professors in general. Now we get into the specific course context. How do you feel about using social media in your classes? And only 10% said they were okay with having it be required for them to use it. Think about that. That's not a very high percentage saying that they're okay with the required use. And I love that comment. Aren't professors humans? I don't know. I haven't checked recently. I think so. So about a third of them thought that instructors should be encouraged to use social media, but again, that's not making it required. Are they comfortable sharing personal information with their class via social media? Only about a fifth of them. Do they want to connect with their classmates? Maybe 2/5 of them. And do they want to connect with their instructor? Now, you might remember on the previous slide there was a higher rate of connecting with instructors, but that was just like way out in the open world. Now it's specifically in your class with your teacher. Who knows who it could be? Do you want to connect with them? Not that many of them do. Okay, now getting into this issue of online coursework. If you had to post your coursework online, are you concerned about the quality? Oh yeah, half of them are. Are you concerned about removing that at the end of the course? Half of them would like to do that. Doesn't mean that they always do. In my experience, a lot of them forget to do that. But when posed with the idea of it, they like to. That always makes me think that one of those things that instructors should do is take on the responsibility of telling students, okay, everything's been graded. If you want to go remove it now, that's okay. Now, 2/3 of them said that they thought the instructors should be the only audience for their assignments. So not even sharing them with their classmates. Forget the whole rest of the world. But interestingly, if you flip it around, you say, so have you learned from what other students have posted online? And they say yes. So they like to see what other people have done, but they don't want to share their own stuff. So if we try to sum this all up, there's some definite boundary concerns that students have, and you echoed some of that at the beginning.
Yeah.
Definitely want to use tools in some contexts, but not others. Want to observe, but not be observed. That's actually pretty human, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whether you're in the instructor position or the student position, I always get a little creeped out when people say, yeah, I Googled you. I'm like, ah. But it somewhat refutes that idea that social media use is really what's going to motivate and excite students. Now, I'm going to shift once more at this point and talk specifically about Facebook. And I think Facebook is a unique case. But as we begin that, I want to see what you guys think right now about Facebook. Are you comfortable being Facebook friends with your students, or if you're a student, with your instructor? So go ahead and put your vote in there. And I'll say I'm Facebook friends with a fair number of students. Now, my students are all grad students like you, and I'm very conscious of the fact that they are my Facebook friends. I let them initiate the friendship. I don't want anybody to feel pressured to be my friend, and that's a very conscious thing. How about you?
Facebook. Actually, how can I say? Actually, for the Facebook, I try to be more public. Yeah, so sometimes I feel like I cannot. I'm hesitant to post my personal life because I make so many friends from academic areas, and So yeah.
Well, that's part of the awkwardness of Facebook, and we see in our poll here the leading columns. We have folks only being friends under select conditions, like people they know well, they work closely with, and I totally understand that. In fact, it's easier for me because my students are graduate students and they're my future colleagues. I work closely with them. I don't think I could do the same thing. I couldn't have the same policy if I were teaching large classes of undergraduate students. I would not be so comfortable with doing that. And exactly what you said actually launches me into the next bit, which is that Facebook is such a special case because, like you said, you want to be personal on there, but then everybody is on Facebook, right? Okay, so
and actually it is really hard to reject making friends with when some people ask me to be
Facebook
friend, but it's really hard.
I get strange ones all the time. I have no problem saying no. But so here's a special case of Facebook, and I just grabbed a collection of my own profile photos from here because I think it captures some of the issues. So if you look at this, you can tell certain things about me. None of these is exceptionally professorial. I think you can see my husband, my father, my mother, my daughter. Okay, so you might get a sense that family is important to me. I'm a superhero. One of my students created that for me. I totally love it. And my 5-year-old thinks that mommy was a superhero before she was born because she saw that picture. And then bunny ears from last Easter when I was having fun. But note that the tone of those is all just kind of low-level, playful, major events of life, nothing I would be embarrassed by anybody seeing. And that's one of the big tests that I have with all of the things that I put on there, because Facebook is like a big melting pot of everybody in your life. So if you share something with one person, you're really sharing it with all of them. And I know you can set your settings to different things, but let's be honest. How many of us really spend the time to manage those settings that closely? Very few of us do.
Not me.
So I get into, well, who's connected to me, right? So here are all kinds of people who could be connected to me or connected to the people who are connected to me. And we've got family, folks from college, from high school, current students, my colleagues, my acquaintances, all sorts of things. Fabrizio saying behave on social media as you behave in real life. I would say, Fabrizio, even more careful than you would be in real life, because in real life you can look around the room, like I could say, oh look, it's just me and GA. No problem, I don't have to worry about some things, it's just GA. But I might be concerned if there were more people, the webcam's on, oops. That does cause a slightly bigger problem. So yeah, thinking about grandma, I like to lump in all of these people, you know, so I go to my mother-in-law, my boss, my neighbor, my best friend, my worst enemy, you know, can I do this in front of all of these people? If I can, then it's Facebook safe. Now, privacy in Facebook, this comes from other research, but I wanted to call your attention to it. I think it's really important. So we see that half of all users struggle with the privacy settings. 15% of the traditional college student group has posted stuff that they later regretted. Not a huge number, but nonetheless, 15% is nothing to ignore. A study where they went and looked at what people's settings actually were versus what they thought their settings were showed a really high level of discrepancy. So even if you're saying, oh yeah, I got that under control, you probably don't. And we all know that Facebook changes the settings all the time. And you know, most of us, how about you guys? Do you trust the Facebook settings? Do you trust Facebook to not change the settings and suddenly have your private stuff go public or crazy stuff like that happen? And then finally, this ties into the 15% of the traditional college age group saying they've posted stuff they later regret. And the privacy protecting behavior is most common among the people who've already had a negative experience. So that starts to suggest that there may be that 85% who's not protecting themselves sufficiently because they just haven't had a negative experience yet. Now, getting at the issue of learner motivation, because I've heard a lot of use Facebook, they're all on it, they'll be motivated to use it. A bunch of stuff that shows that you know, students are acting not out of their generational destiny, but out of their own agency. So it's not about tapping into that digital native generation. And that the technologies they use in personal lives are different from the ones they use in the classrooms. And they may actually have them quite bracketed out and not want to use those personalized technologies in the classroom. And you know, I see what's coming up in the chat here. No, we don't have very much control over what the students are doing on Facebook. So the question is, do we choose to use it for a class, and how do they feel about it, knowing that it's really a social space, and if we try to use it as a formal school space, we're trying to push a different purpose on it. And some more recent, Carrie Berner and I have been doing another survey this semester. We haven't gone through it all yet, but like 350 respondents. And just taking a quick look at the data, we're finding that about 10% aren't even on Facebook to begin with. So if a class were to do something on Facebook, these students would be pushed into getting an account on there. Now, if we contrast that informal and the formal use, so we have students who are choosing to integrate Facebook with their school experiences, and that's all a very positive thing. But you know, fewer than a quarter of them wanted to use Facebook for their class again. And in a different type of system, that it was to emulate all the social networking stuff for our course, what was found was that the students didn't focus on the social stuff that they could be engaging in when all of that social media rich environment was, but rather exactly what was going to be going on in a school system. And you have a really good point there, Malcolm, that a lot of this is beyond schools, and when we have adult learners who are doing their own thing, then we have some very different circumstances for Facebook. But I guess I feel strongly enough about the way Facebook has been treated in schools that I did want to devote a little bit of attention to those issues. And I did, the last time I went to a conference, I was talking about something totally unrelated about student interaction behaviors in using discussion boards. And it was kind of underwhelming how people interacted with each other in this class in their learner management system. And a gentleman stood up and said, oh, well, that's because you're not using social media. You should put all the students in Facebook. I use Facebook for everything, and they love it. You know, I said, really? Well, I've been getting in these survey results that suggest that there's a number of students who aren't even on Facebook, and so far they're not really overwhelmingly interested in using it. And he just said, well, they get over it. And the ones who aren't on it, well, that's fine. They can just choose to not be a part of that part of the class. But, well, that's getting into some dodgy territory ethically for me. So I see two big dilemmas with Facebook. You know, one is the digital footprint dilemma. And I have a student who, you'll know who I'm talking about, I think. Lots of our folks around here know who this is, who does not have a Facebook account, does not want to be on Facebook, and that's fine. No need for this person to be on there. But so we're asking students who already have the account to consider this to be not just social but a learning space, but the ones who don't have the account suddenly are creating this digital footprint on Facebook. And so, what are our options? Well, you say create a new account under your real name, and now you're leaving that digital footprint. If you create a new account or a second account to keep it separate under a fictitious name, then you're actually violating Facebook's terms of service. I feel really conflicted here. Do I tell a student to violate what feels important to them about their digital footprint, or do I tell them to violate the terms of service of a technology company? It's like a real ethical dilemma to me, which, I don't use Facebook in classes, so I haven't faced it, but it's just a hypothetical. Or opt out, where the student's excluded from part of the learning experience. But is that really fair to that student? What are they missing out on? And I've heard of plenty of situations where instructors say, well, it's fun. I give extra study questions on there. I do little informal quizzes for the students. And yeah, and you've got a percentage of your learners who will have to choose between missing part of the course experience or doing something that makes them feel personally uncomfortable. And then the other dilemma, and the one we already started talking about, which is the friending dilemma. So is it acceptable for professors and students to be friends? When? Who initiates? What's going to be awkward, right? Because I have graduate students as my friends, I try to never post anything that would be awkward for them to see.
Yeah.
And you can look at, does your institution have policies? You can allow the students to initiate. You can create your own policy. I know people who make formal policies and say to students, I will not be your Facebook friend until after you have graduated. And there are personal choices to be made here, but I think the important thing is to make your choice and to articulate it to other people. And so this isn't directly in the classroom thing, or you said before, you might feel uncomfortable about not accepting a request from somebody in Facebook. I would say you don't need to feel uncomfortable, but you could, let's say you decided you were going to restrict your Facebook account to family and close friends. There's nothing wrong with responding to that friend request and saying, I'm sorry, I keep my Facebook account to a very small closed group. But I welcome you to connect to me on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever other space that you might choose for more general use. Danger of falling back into social media is Facebook. Well, actually, we're about to move on to some other stuff here, Malcolm, so we'll get off of this Facebook topic. I'm actually going to shift us now onto this idea of having social media guidelines. And here, what technology, what tool we're talking about, anything goes. I just wanted to make sure that the Facebook stuff got covered somewhere in this course, because I think Facebook is a very unique situation because it melds everybody together into one big spot, and there's a general lack of trust with how frequently the tool changes and people's lack of understanding about how to adjust the settings. So it's its own unique thing, and it certainly is not all social media, far from it. So we'll do one more poll. Do you guys have guidelines? If there are guidelines that you follow for social media, not for Facebook here, for social media, what pushes you the most? Is it your institution, something set from your professional organization, your personal guidelines, or do you just not have any that you use at this point in time? Which is fine. It's actually something you get to do this week, is to set up some guidelines for yourself and for your students, obviously.
Yeah.
And my guidelines have been developed over time in reaction to situations that I've dealt with, and I would consider them to be fluid. I change little bits and pieces of them every year as I teach, and I have slightly different ones for different classes too, based on what we're doing in a given class. And I like to see that we've got a lot of folks who are using personal guidelines, and there are also institutional guidelines. And you can bring together the mixture from different places. I've found that when there are institutional guidelines or even professional organization guidelines, they don't get down to a specific enough level for me about what I want to do and what I want to communicate to others is going to be my policy and how I'm going to treat the different tools that we are going to use.
Yeah, I'm taking a course and the instructor allowed us to post our weekly discussion after we made our own blogs. But actually, if he or she may provide some guidelines before he start his course, maybe it would be better when we choose the course. You know,
a little more comfortable.
Yeah, comfortable. Sometimes the students who are not comfortable using social media tool as, you know, when they post their assignments.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so maybe it is really important to provide it before at the very beginning of the course. I think so.
Well, it just sets everything out in front of everybody, and sometimes you let people know things to be concerned about that they didn't know they would be concerned about, or you set the expectations. I find that helps so much. It reduces on later communications, or actually I should say later miscommunications about a lot of things. And from the comments I see things like, you know, it's tricky in corporate atmospheres, and you need to keep corporate information private. So again, you may think about, well, what tools am I going to be using here? What accounts am I going to be using for what things? Might I need multiple accounts? How do I differentiate me, the corporate person, from me, the personal person? It's not going to be one size fits all for that account, and it's difficult to juggle multiple accounts on a system, but it can definitely be worthwhile for you to do that as well. You know, and to let students know. So this next bit that GA and I are going to go into is talking about our own privacy and ethics journey. And there's our superhero avatars that we created for this because we were having some fun with it. And we actually posted to a bunch of avatar creators this week, and we encourage you to have some similar fun, but you know, along these lines for privacy purposes. You know, you can tell people you don't have to show yourself. You don't have to always be yourself. And I really can't stress that enough to folks. Now, in a corporate setting, you may have to really be representing as yourself. Or as a professor, I often need to be representing as myself. And yet, you know, I don't always have to post everything as Vanessa Denon. I could be Prof V on some system if I wanted to. And that would be perfectly fine, and it still establishes clearly who I am and what I'm doing in that setting. So some of the situations, these are our 6 situations that have really made us more aware and sensitive to some of the privacy and ethics related issues that are out there, and certainly my own guidelines are formed largely based on some of these experiences. So the first one I want to get into was the stalker. Not my stalker, but I was a graduate student, and I was teaching an online course, and in those days the learning management system that we used didn't automatically add students in from the database from the registrar's office. So the instructor of the class had to manually put somebody into the system. And I had a small class, like 10 students in the class. I had a roster, and I was typing their names in, creating accounts, and sending them emails saying, here's your account, here's how you log in. And one of my students contacted me and said, I have a stalker, and I'm really afraid of this. Is my name going to be out there? And I said, well, no, your name's not going to be out there because this is a closed, restricted system. This is a semi-private system. Going back to that privacy scale. The only people who are going to see this are the other people in the class and me. So that's a total of 11 of us, including you and me. And I could tell she still wasn't comfortable. And I realized that there was no reason why she had to be in there under her legal name. So I said, well, what name should we call you in this class? And we didn't want to pick a ridiculous name for her because then it would be obvious what we were doing. So we just picked a name that sounded like a reasonable name that somebody would have. Something like Helen James. And we put her in the system that way, and that's who she was for the whole term. And it enabled her to comfortably interact with everybody in the class. And so even though I could look at it and say, hey, there's not really much danger here. Everything's restricted to this small group of people. That doesn't matter. Her comfort as a student was really the most important thing in this situation. Now, another because again, it's all about risk and discomfort. Another one is Googling. Anybody here? You almost vanity Google, right? You see what's online about you? Okay, so I've got two situations about this. I have students keep reflective blogs for courses all the time, and they've got lots of options as to how they want to keep them. And you know, here's a student who decided to just put it out under his regular Google account, under his regular name, and then he came back to me about 2 years, 3 years later and said he was Googling his own name during a job search just to check what was out there. And he came across this blog that he did for class, and he'd totally forgotten about it, and seeing it again prompted him to email me. There was no harm done in this case. And I of course, immediately said, you can delete it if you want to. And he said, I really don't care. But it's still there. And I thought, yeah, it is still there. And I wonder how many students don't realize that it's still there. And again, who forget that deleting it is an option. Because what do? We finish the course, you turn everything in, and it's like, it's so done. I'm celebrating, and I'm ready to move on to the next. And you haven't really finished everything up if you haven't gone back and taken care of that. Then there's another one that happened to me where I was at a social event at the university a couple of years ago, and a student came up to me and started saying these things that just seemed more familiar than I thought the student should be with me. The student actually mentioned a race time that I'd had running a race years ago. Oh, wow. And he was like, so I hear you run. And it was kind of creepy feeling, I will admit. And I thought about it, like, wow, that person not only went under Google to Google my name, because if you go there, you get all this university stuff and tons of conferences and papers, and you have to go deep into Googling me to find this stuff. But it's there. I didn't put it online, and there it was. Again, no harm done, but definitely a moment of self-consciousness for me. And, you know, sometimes maybe suggest that your students try this to see what's online about them before they make decisions about what they want to put out there publicly under their own name. Now then there's the research participant. This one, so I was the researcher, and we were looking at students who were tweeting, and they were pre-service teachers. And a lot of the students hadn't used Twitter before, and they set up new accounts for the class. This happened to be a student who had already been using Twitter and had her own account, and chose them, because we said to them, you might not want to use the same account, but a number of them said, too difficult to have multiple accounts. And so she chose to tweet under the same account for class. Now what's here is not what she posted to the class hashtag, but it was something that she tweeted, and now all tweets that are public, and these were public tweets, are archived in the Library of Congress. And she wants to be a teacher in the future. And so we have obscenities, and we have somebody talking about partying on their 19th birthday, being very specific about their age, and then tweeting a picture with beers. Okay, and here in the U.S. it is not legal to have beer in your hand for your 19th birthday. Doesn't mean a lot of people don't, but certainly not legal. And look at what she just put out there. Foul language and an illegal activity that could be searched later on. And that posed an ethical question for us as researchers, which was, should we let her know that she's engaging in a behavior? Should we step over those bounds? Or should we say something to the instructor and ask the instructor to step over and say something? But this is proof of those learning moments that we can have with our students. We can't govern what they do in their own life, but we can make them aware, especially if they haven't thought about these things before. Okay, so next we've got public blunders. And I see this one happen all the time. I don't give these assignments out to my students, so I don't have them happen personally. But I'm on any number of listservs and forums, and you see somebody send out a message that says something like, does anybody know any resources on constructivism? Wow, big topic. Did you even look at the library yet? And people will come out and be critical. And all that stuff gets archived, and it's searchable later, and you might feel weird about it. I remember finding at one point that, I did my master's thesis with an online survey, and I sent out requests for participants back in 1994, I think it was, that I sent the survey out. And sometime well over 10 years later, I found the archive of my request for participants that was sent out to this place online, still hanging out there. And there's nothing really embarrassing about that, but the potential for these interactions to make people feel embarrassed later on and to live on in an archive that you have no control over whatsoever is pretty great. So, you know, letting students know before they go to interact what's appropriate, what's inappropriate can be really helpful. Now, there's a time to teach technology, and for me, this is comes down to an ethical one when I decide whether or not to use it. And wow, I have found time and again it takes longer to teach how to use these tools than I expected. You get students who can't remember their usernames and passwords. I can't help you. This is something that you set up on a totally different system. I didn't set your username and password. You have to go through the help. But it certainly confuses them quite a bit. Or they'll struggle with the purpose. What are we doing this for? Am I learning this content or am I learning this tool? Yeah. And because we're spending this much time learning the tool, is it about the tool or the content? And for people who don't want to do it, it can really be as demotivational as it is motivational. Teaching pre-service teachers to use Twitter was certainly in this category because we thought it would be so easy because they use Facebook, they do text messaging, all that short messaging seems so familiar. And they were like, it's just dumb. And then they started saying, it's hard. Like, how hard can tweeting be? I know all sorts of people with low tech abilities who figured out how to tweet. And you know, if you're not motivated to do it, you're not motivated to do it. So why are we doing it? I'm going to let you talk about this last one because I know you raised this as a concern.
Okay, right. You know, the other issue is like when I was learning in a online course and we had a discussion board, so every week we had to post a short description about each topic. But I noticed that so many students are just a copy from the others' work. You know, just to search the topic, and we can see so many resources from the blogs and other websites, and they just copy and paste it, and they got their own credit about that. So actually it happens a lot. Yeah, I can tell. So maybe it is one of the big issue.
Well, and I think that's a big danger. And we could spend a whole week just talking about plagiarism type issues online. But often when we say plagiarism, we think about whole papers. But when you start talking about blogs and forums, you get into spaces where people actually are writing short messages that are, you know, just about their opinions, and it is easy to grab from there. You know, so we have a question: would Turnitin find the copying? Well, yeah, if you ran something through Turnitin, but let's say somebody is using what they're finding in a forum elsewhere to be their weekly discussion board postings in a class, or grabbing a blog post from elsewhere and putting it on their blog and just claiming authorship. And we tend to not run those things through Turnitin. Or you could go to all the trouble of grabbing all of those text files to do it, but it's a lot of work for an instructor to police something that's done in a setting like that. And you can Google it too, but if you've got a bunch of students keeping blogs, for example, or engage in a discussion board, are you going to spend the time as the instructor to Google everyone in order to seek out those kinds of problems? It's just not practical for most of us to do that. And so that's part of the challenge. Sometimes you can start to tell because you're familiar with the student's voice and this doesn't sound like the student's voice, so you do then Google. But you may never know. You may never know to what degree something like that is happening. So with this area of social media guidelines, and one of my sets of guidelines is actually linked from the module this week to share with all of you, and the module project is to start to come up with, you know, formalizing some sort of document that communicates best to whoever your learner or audience group is, you know, what guidelines you're going to use. What are your most important ones? What do you already do? What are you struggling with? Go ahead and share with us in the chat about this. And some of the stuff that I like to cover is I'm really big on go ahead and use pseudonyms and use avatars and turn off the search engine indexing if that pertains to, like, if we're doing something like blogging. You know, if you're going to post stuff on YouTube, you can actually make the choice whether it's going to be private or public, or there's a middle ground of unlisted. so you can share your link with other people, but not have the whole world going out and finding it or having it show up in the recommended items list on the side or in your YouTube channel, to keeping things separated. I find that helping my students be aware of all of those options and encouraging them to use them, and also encouraging them to tell me right away if they feel uncomfortable. And I try to be really warm and welcoming about that, that I am so okay with that, that my job is to help you find the right solutions. You're not upsetting me as an instructor. It's not going to hurt your grade. I'm happy to help you. In fact, it's a really good challenge to help students figure out, based on wherever their level of comfort is, what they can do. And Nels, I think you have a great point there. Part of our job is to teach students how to use the publicly available tools and how to use them responsibly in a way that is a good match with their comfort level. Now with some learners in some contexts, you may not want to do that. My husband did a blogging project with his history of religion class, and that's a class where students like to really talk about their own religious beliefs as they relate to the stuff that they're learning about historically. And religion tends to be a fairly sensitive topic, and so they do everything closed behind the walls of edublogs, and that works really well for them in that context. In other situations, it may make a lot of sense to be on the open stage of the internet. I always suggest that instructors really make a conscious decision for themselves about that. What's there to gain and what's there to lose for the students if you are having them right out there using the publicly available tools and using them in a public sense, or closing them off in a group so they can learn how to use them in a safer setting, just with the folks who are in the class. But I mean, the stuff that's coming up in the chat is really indicative of the important stuff. Knowing what your boundaries are is important. Setting a boundary if it's going to be something like who you're going to connect with on Facebook or wherever else. And even if you don't use Facebook, people will find you and ask to be your friend. So having a policy and being comfortable articulating it, then that's important. Oh, Malcolm, that's a good one. If research shows you can't actually teach teens to be responsible online, it can't be assumed that trying to teach it will work. Well, they are online, though. I mean, I think that we can teach it. I'm not sure that some of the tactics that I've seen are the best tactics, because a lot of the stuff that I've seen is all about just throwing a lot of information and rules and scary stuff at them. And if we look at the research, which shows that it's people who had negative consequences who tend to start to restrict their privacy, then we're just waiting until somebody has a negative event happening. I don't think that's a great idea, but I'd like to think, and I don't have the research, unfortunately, to support this, or necessarily to refute this idea either, but I'd like to think that if we can use the tools with our students in the class, and we can model appropriate use and get them used to using the tools in an appropriate manner in that class setting, then we start to form some of their habits about how those tools are used, and that they can go on and continue with those good habits that they've developed. And then we can also certainly make sure that they're aware of the different options that they have. I think it's easier to do when you've got somebody directly in the situation of using a tool, rather than to just say, oh, big bad things are going to happen if you do this, and it's totally out of context. I think it also comes from a better place for them if it comes from an instructor who they respect, and I'm not going to say with whom they're friends, but with whom they feel that they have a good rapport, as opposed to if it just comes from an authority who seems like they're just going to try to scare them and lay down some sort of punitive measures, which just isn't that effective for a lot of people. We also had a comment in the chat about, shouldn't we use the tools that the institution provides? I'm guessing, things like the learner management system. Absolutely. I don't use social media tools in all of my courses. I teach a class called Theories of Learning and Cognition, and we use learning management system. There's no reason to use other tools in that course. But there are other courses where I want the students to learn how to access all the resources that are available online, or I want to do things that aren't possible in our learner management system because I'm trying to be a little more learner-centered, and it's a very instructor-centered, instructor-controlled system, and so then I may branch out a little bit. This is why institutions can set guidelines. Is the institution liable? Well, what are they liable for? They're not responsible for everything their students do out on the open stage. This is why K-12 institutions tend to have very strict guidelines for their learners, but institutions of higher education have kind of largely thrown up their hands about policing these types of activities. Unfortunately, when those policies come into place is when something negative has happened. And I hate to see that happen. I try to go proactively with stuff, and if I see people doing things they may not want to be doing, I will try to make them aware of it, and I try to do it in a helpful way as opposed to a manner that's really full of authority and coming down on them, because you want the message to be listened to. But institutions that aren't comfortable with these risks will try to shut things down. A lot of them can't control it. Higher ed has a hard time controlling it. Corporate environments, they can set rules for their employees and let people go. So that's a totally different kind of environment. They absolutely can do it. So 6 o'clock here. So just to wrap things up, I'll encourage you this week to really think about how social media guidelines, your own guidelines, on top of whatever's there for the institution, on top of what your professional organizations may put out as suggestions. You may have your own additional ones that either are more stringent or cover other areas that aren't yet covered in those guidelines. Think about how those can help you perform your job better, be more comfortable, help your learners or your colleagues be more comfortable, have clearer expectations about what's going to happen. Think about what you would include in your guidelines. And I hope you'll keep sharing on this topic this week in the discussion forum, on Twitter, on the Facebook page if you want to be interacting there, and looking forward to seeing the projects that come up this week. So thank you so much for joining us today, and
Thank you.
We'll see you online.